Okay, let's bring in Brent Fikowski. Brent, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. How you been?
Been good. I've been very good. How are you guys?
We're hanging in there, man. We're just getting ready for a season to start. That'd be nice if we can actually get some action to talk about here. But first of all, just wanted to ask you about the fact that we have not complete clarity on the season, but we have some, and it is sort of mirroring the old system that we under which we used to operate. What's it like now having that in front of you as an athlete, so you know kind of where you need and how you need to train?
Yeah, I mean, it's always nice to know what you're working towards. So it's exciting. I mean, the motivation's like definitely there. The training's going really well. And even if I didn't know exactly what was going to happen, and we still don't really know, like, I don't know exactly what weekend or where I'll be competing. And we're hoping it'll be, like May, June. But yeah, I mean, it's nice. It's nice to have some semblance. The more information, the better, in my opinion. But yeah, it is nice to know that yeah, like a little more clarity on what's going on for sure.
And so, we had a chance to chat with you briefly a few weekends ago, but I was just kind of curious, what are some things right now in your training as you're getting ready for the season that you're focused on to improve in the interim?
Oh man, there's lots of things, and it kind of shifts throughout the season for sure. So, closer to the competition, it's my training looks a lot like a competition. So there's kind of like lots of variety and lots of scenarios that are similar to what I would expect. So, like for example, I'm not swimming right now at all. Traditionally I do pretty well in swimming events, and it's something I'm good at. So I don't do it at all. But leading into a competition where there's a good chance I'm in a pool, then we'll be swimming like once a week. And so, kind of like flipping that on its head. Right now, lots of squat strength and some kind of like squat speed and squat speed endurance type stuff. So putting it in some very specific like workout scenarios, but then also just like loading the squat heavy, and then also doing something like kind of like supersets, like quad endurance supersets. We might do something like, 3 heavy pause squats directly into jumping lunges, directly into like goblet squats, but with like really high heel elevation, so you're really pushing your knees forward, so it's just like all quad activation, and doing that for like rounds. So things like that, and then a lot of sprint workouts, like shorter CrossFit workouts, trying to build up that kind of like confidence and capacity in some more sprint style cycle rate CrossFit workouts, because that's something I've struggled with. Continuing to improve my handstand push-ups and like burpees, and so just lots of handstand push-ups and burpees, and then some specific strength related things for like pressing with the upper body. And then those are the main things, and then just kind of continuing to build a base, like an aerobic base, and big lungs and stuff, without like it as much of that as possible without it interfering with the other training. And so it's kind of like you have like a certain number of like units per week of like energy, let's say, for like your legs and your arms, if you just put it really simply. And so, me going for like a, 20 kilometers of running each week, it's like, well, then like you can't squat that much. Like, there is a limit. You can't just add. So it's like as much of that kind of like steady state conditioning as we can do to keep fit without it interfering with everything else.
For sure. And so
long answer.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's great. It's detailed and it's in depth, what we come to expect from the professor. But what I'm curious now is, and that kind of begs another question that we kind of chatted about previously, but how does that training, what your training is now, look like compared to, when you were working full time, when you were a student? Because that is very involved, the way you described it, and it requires a lot of meticulousness and a great deal of attention, I'd imagine, that for an athlete that is a professional athlete and solely focused on competing.
Yeah, it's so that's something like I kind of take for granted that not everyone kind of knows that story, because like I was there, right? So, and I've told, I've discussed this, I guess, in somewhat detail, but it was like 5 years ago. And so a lot of people listen to this podcast or that follow me on Instagram, like they probably might not have known me back then. And so when I first started, I was a student, and I was going to university full time, while I went to my first regional in 2013 in Australia. And then the next couple of years I was working full time, and I was working full time even when I got second place at the CrossFit Games in 2017. I was fortunate to have a job that was pretty flexible with hours, but I was still in the office, 40 hours a week. And even usually on my laptop, sometimes at home, because it was like a tech company, online company. And so what that looked like back then was, if I was awake, I was basically at the job, at the gym, or in the kitchen. It's like, those are like the three places you'd find me. I'm one of my friends that I'm still friends with now. When I first moved to Kelowna, my wife she was my wife at the time, but she was moving here from Australia. So we were apart for a couple weeks or a couple months. And we were talking about it the other day, and he described me as like an immigrant worker that had moved from like a foreign country and was like sending money back to his family, and was just so that's how and we laughed about it. And I never thought of it. He's like, dude, you were crazy back then. He's like, you would wake up like 5 a.m., go to the gym. The gym wasn't even like officially open, the one that I was going to at the time. So I had a key, and I just trained by myself for like 2 hours in the morning. And then I showered there, and I put on my clothes. So I had like, 2 bags, and then a bag with my clothes, and then like 3 lunch kits, and I had it all prepped. And then I'd go to work, and then I'd finish work, and sometimes I'd either come back to the gym or I'd go home, and I'd just prep to do it all again. And I'd get home at like 5:30, and I'm like, okay, I only have like 2.5 hours before I have to go to bed so I can get enough sleep. And so it's just like cook, clean, laundry, and then I just go to bed. And I just did that for like 3 months. And like, he was the only friend I basically made. So that's kind of what it looked like. It was like, really, it's painfully simple. And then Sundays was just this massive like meal prep errands day. So I'd, go to, like one grocery store, get all my groceries there, come home, fill up the oven with sweet potato, 2 crock pots with like a stew and meat. And then I'd start slicing up like fresh veggies. And then I'd, fill like 12 containers, because that was 6 days, 2 meals a day. I'd hard boil a bunch of eggs, and it's like, all right, let's do it again. That's what it used to look like.
So yeah. When did you make the decision, when you start CrossFit, when did you make the decision to say, all right, I want to be competitive?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, that's a question people ask me. They'll ask it in different ways. Like, oh, like, when did you decide you wanted to go to the games, or when did you move from like, RX to elite or something like that? And I've always been competitive. Like, I competed in sports, from grade 1 until grade 12. And then I competed in college volleyball. And so whenever I've been active, I viewed it as a competition. Like, that's, and so when I train, it's like, okay, I'm training to get better for a competition. It's never just like for the sake of like enjoying the training session, although usually they are enjoyable. And so as soon as I started CrossFit, when I first came in, CrossFit was a way for me to get better at volleyball. Like, that's why I was there. So I was like, all right, like, how is this going to make me like jump higher or hit the ball harder? And so when I kind of wrap my head around that, I'm like, oh, if I can do, like 10 touch and go power cleans at 135 pounds, like that's kind of like jumping. And so, probably jump higher if I get really good at that. So I fell in love with it. And then someone dragged me to a local competition. This was in, I think it was September of 2012. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing CrossFit for like 4 months or something. And they brought me this little kind of like one-day barbecue competition thing. And I did it. And I was like, just kind of was hooked. I was like, wow, I did pretty well. I came like 5th. And I probably would have come 3rd if I could do a single ring muscle up. And I would have been on like the podium and probably got like a, like a little bucket of protein or something like that. And I thought like, like, I'm like the skinniest guy here. And I'm like definitely younger than a lot of these guys. I'm like, I think I could like, I think if I just keep working at this and I get my first muscle up, like I could probably be pretty good. And so then it kind of transitioned over the next year from a way to get better at volleyball to CrossFit for the sake of getting better at CrossFit and competing. And like, I wasn't doing it to like win the CrossFit Games, right? It was just like, oh, there's these other cool competitions coming up that I want to do. And so I just would figure out how to be ready for that and take advice from my coach, watch some videos on YouTube. And then he told me about the Open. And so we did the Open like 6 months late, I guess. We ran through the 2012 Open to see where I'd place. And we were like, I was pretty close to qualifying for regionals. And I was like, well, if I work hard for another like 6 months, then I could probably make it to regionals. He's like, yeah, that'd be cool. And, we watched some videos. I'm like, yeah, that looks pretty sweet. And so then that was kind of it. It's like, I just set my sights on that. And I was fortunate enough to have the fitness when I came in that, in 6 months, I was able to go to regionals at that point, 2013. And then it was just kind of a constant, like, what's next? And I didn't really even really think I could make the games or really even care about making the games until I was after regionals in 2014, when I just missed out on the games. Mm-hmm. And like, I saw that weekend as overall as a big win, because I was like, wow, I improved after kind of what was not a great year of training. And I was like pretty close to making the games, actually one overhead squat away, for those that kind of know the story.
Yeah. Yep.
And so it's just kind of this, like, it was just this really gradual, natural progression. And I didn't really like believe something until there was like a lot of evidence to show that, like, oh yeah, like that can happen. And it was just an enjoyment of the training and like going to these small little competitions that kind of dragged me along, not like something that's like, I'm going to the Olympics when I like first picked up a basketball type thing.
Yeah. You just kind of keep that pursuit on, and over time you get better at it. So you seek out, competition and things that meets that and fulfills that competitive drive. And before you know it, you're second fittest man on earth, right?
Yeah, I guess so. And then, now I got to get back up on that podium, which is the plan. And that's something that's been kind of, I was talking to my wife about this, and like, I like to see progress, right? It's not. And so when you've done that well, when I came second in the world, at least on paper, since then, I haven't placed as high at the CrossFit Games. I've had other great competitions. I won regionals and I won Dubai and stuff. And so like there's still those wins, but it's like, it's kind of been an interesting journey, like figuring out, I want to keep progressing, like whether that's like just everything, like with my relationship with my wife, with, I guess the amount of money I'm making, like whatever it is, like even the quality of my sleep, it's like, all right, if I can get my sleep to a certain quality, or my, my back squat to a certain, it's like, that's the new minimum. Like you can't go back. Like there's no regression. And, when I placed that high, I still plan to keep that up, but it's like, when you're that high, you kind of, any little up and down from there, even a down is, it's challenging, but,
yeah. And hearing you say that too, there's this kind of, I don't know, maybe it's innate, but this drive of, in pursuit of improvement, like you said, and progress. And I'm curious, where does that come from? If you've had time to reflect on that, if that's something that's always just kind of been the case for you, if the, 5-year-old Brent Fikowski was figuring out how to do his parents' taxes, or like, or finding ways to, make lunchtime more efficient, but, or recess more efficient. Like, I don't know. Some people just have it. Some people it's developed, or they can point to someone that's helped cultivate that for them. I'm just kind of curious where you stand on that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's definitely a facet of me that's I've kind of always had. And it's probably one of my, like, if I was like a character in a video game and you kind of had like strengths and weaknesses, it would be like one of the, like, the defining characteristics. Like if I was like a stock character in some drama movie, and he had, like, if you had to describe that character in a sentence, that would probably be one of the things in my sentence. But I think it can definitely be taught. And I think it's just like, in a word, it's kind of in a confined, it's just goal oriented, right? So it's like, I don't like the short-term thrills never really like did as much for me, And so I had a volleyball coach, for example, and well, I've been blessed to have like a lot of really good volleyball coaches. But one of the quotes that's kind of stuck with me, he said, is parties are best when you save them. And so the idea with that being like, it was kind of motivation. I think it was his way of hoping that the team wouldn't party every single night. And instead we would wait until we did something that was worth partying for. It was kind of like the way he put it. And, for me, like, whether not to like bring it back to like partying, but, the celebrations I've had with, like, whether it's teammates or, just like internal victories, are so much sweeter the longer they've taken. Right. And the more time you've put in. And so that, like, self-satisfaction, as opposed to, I could drive down the street and buy, an expensive burger, but like anyone can experience that has $15 or $20, right? Same with a party. I guess not right now because COVID, but I could theoretically go to a nightclub, right, and get a bunch of drinks and party and dance and rave. And so it's like, that's kind of like a cheap thrill, and those are fun, but the more you do that, the duller it becomes. Whereas those, like, peak moments and, like, things that are, and I think the competition, that's what's nice about sport and business as well, is because so many people are striving for it, it's harder to attain. And so when you get that thing or get closer to it, or even just the act of striving towards it, is satisfying because it's a challenge, right? It's not just something that you can just attain with, you can just walk across, like, you can't just, no one just snatches, 300 pounds, right? It's like, that has to be worked at.
you talked about improving, and obviously when you first start CrossFit and you improve, those comes in leaps and bounds. But when you get to where you are, I'm guessing they're a little more incremental. So what does improvement now look like to you?
That's a good question. A lot of times it's, it looks, I spoke with another CrossFit athlete kind of about this, and how the longer you're on a journey, like on paper, it's the same, so since I started CrossFit, it's almost been 9 years, on paper, it's like, get better at competitions, and competitions are, like you could loosely describe them as constantly varied functional movement, burpees and thrusters and rope climbs, whatever. And so that on paper, it's the same, but the challenges and like the mental demons you have to overcome, completely different now than they were when I started. And I still love like that like one sentence definition that I'm striving towards. But like, the difference between, like I was talking about, being like sending money to like a foreign country, kind of that sort of lifestyle is totally different to the lifestyle I'm living now. And they're both just as challenging. This one's probably in a lot of ways more challenging, but in like totally different ways. And even a competition, the athlete I was speaking to, it was Katrin. It was Katrin, David's daughter. And so we kind of were reminiscing on those first competitions when no one knew who we were. And it was just us and the coach. And, you could walk into Vendor Village and like buy something if you wanted to, and look at some, new gear. And then you could go and compete, and it was just you and your family and your coach. And that sort of like, it was nice. And now like, I'm super grateful for having fans now, but it's totally different, right? You kind of have to like sneak to your car if you want to get home. and there's more expectation, which can be really good, but also can be hard, because there's more doubters. And when no one knows who you are, they don't care if you win or lose, right? It's just you and your family and your coach, and they're just happy for you to be there. And so we looked at that, and we're like, I wouldn't have it any other way. But it totally looks different. And so back to your original question, what does progress look like? It's just like staying focused on what the main goals are, and really refining a system that you trust, and staying true to that system, making changes if there's good reasons to make changes. Like, you can't be afraid to make changes, but you also have to trust the process. And so, for example, when I talk about progress, let's look at something like, I'm trying to think of something I'm working to improve on, like handstand push-ups. I haven't tested my max unbroken strict handstand push-ups in quite some time, which is one of the kind of ways, I guess, you could define progress in that specific thing. There's other ways, but let's just say it's that. When you're first starting, every week you could set a new thing, basically, or every 2 weeks, right? You just do handstand push-ups. They're going to get better. You like learn where to put your hands, and you just do a bunch of stuff, and you lose a bit of weight, and boom, there's 2 more. There's 3 more. Oh, I had a good night's sleep. There's 4 more. And so it just keeps happening. Whereas now, like if I just tested them right now, I probably wouldn't get a personal best. And so progress looks like, well, what am I doing this whole week to make that better? Like, how often did I roll out, like put a lacrosse ball in my teres major, which can get tight? Or how many times did I strict press? And, what communication did it look like with my coach to like fluctuate the training? How many times a week are we strict pressing? What other accessories are we doing? Am I watching videos of other athletes to look at how they do handstand push-ups? Am I, maybe doing some research and like some like strength research on how athletes have improved their bench press for either 1 rep max or reps? And even just, so it's all these things. And like progress is just the reliance on that system and that constant refinement of it, trusting that, hey, like I really like the look of this progression. And I've spoken with as many experts as I can. And they're like, yeah, that progression to get better handstand push-ups, that makes a lot of sense. That should work. I've seen that work with other athletes that are like similar to you. And so then you just have to trust that in, 2 months, or for me, in May, if and when there is a workout with strict handstand push-ups, that I'm going to get a good score. That's like, so it's progress is like so vague now. But it's more like a trust and an informed trust in a set of processes and a set of systems that it's all going to work.
You mentioned overcoming. You mentioned overcoming obstacles, and I'm just curious, what do you think are the major obstacles in your way right now?
For me personally, or just like as a general thing to everyone, or me?
I think for you personally, and then not only personally, but also from a competitive standpoint.
So for me personally, probably a few things that I'm like a little more private about. But one thing that I would say would be, so when I talked about if I was like a video game character, usually whatever your strongest characteristic is often your greatest strength and also your greatest weakness. And so for me, I'm driven and I'm like very like, let's make a list kind of guy. And I've learned because of that, sometimes I have a tough time falling asleep, because I'm just, I'm in bed and it's like I'm studying for a test in my head, or I'll wake up and, like whatever, I'll be sleeping for a couple hours and I'll wake up and it'll literally feel like I'm in the middle of like a multiple choice question test. Cause I'm just firing and just thinking about just these things that I was thinking about through the day. And so for me, a big obstacle for me is to try to, shift that away, like get into more of an alpha brain, gamma brain, like relaxation state, meditate and literally do nothing. And, that you're not going to see any direct improvements from that. You might see like a little better like quality of sleep, or if you're tracking things like heart rate variability or brainwave stuff. And then you'd see intangibles like, oh, like I'm getting better sleeps and I'm feeling more recovered. I'm feeling more relaxed. And then that in turn might improve a few of your training sessions, which then in turn might get one more strict handstand push-up in May, right? And so you're not going to see that like direct correlation. But to me, that's the biggest thing that I'm, some things I like to keep private, but that's kind of one thing that, because it's one of my greater strengths, I've learned that it's also kind of a weakness of mine, is just, even when I'm trying to relax, I'll find myself, like making notes and like brainstorming ideas, or like I've got an idea for an art project I want to make for our living room, or, I'm like, I dreamed up some invention, or I'm writing, so it's just like nonstop. I'm like, all right, Brent, like actually don't do anything. So that's what I'm working on. And then as a competitor in general, I think like what I see usually as the biggest kind of obstacle that a lot of people face is like making sure that their goal is very clear with their training. Right. And so I've always been good to not have that, but something I see a lot of people is it's like, okay, why do you go to the gym? Like, if you go to the gym to get better for competitions, then like make sure what you're doing isn't about just some sort of enjoyment in that moment. Like, oh, I crushed this cool workout I saw on Instagram, like looked spicy. It's like, well, like that's great. But is that the truly best use of your hour and a half in the gym that day in order for you to reach your goal of qualifying for that next event? Probably not. And just really having that goal, or if your true goal is like, longevity and weight loss, then what you do in the gym, you can still do like CrossFit, right? You can still be doing cleans, still be doing burpees, but how that looks and the movement choices and the weight choices you make, and your priority of, let's call it like injury prevention, should be like very different to someone who's training to compete, or at least you should be mindful of those differences. And again, not just be like, oh, that looked like a really cool workout. It's like, well, like, is that really the best use of your time if your primary goal for training is, like longevity or weight loss? Or so that's what I see as most people's kind of problem.
If loving spicy wads you find on Instagram is wrong, I don't want to be right.
That's a good, very niche, but a funny t-shirt.
100%. Oh man. One thing I'm kind of curious about, you're starting to see in the community a little bit more and more. You're seeing CrossFit athletes go out into things like High Rocks and Spartan Games and stuff like that, and other kind of, I guess, applications of fitness in a competitive realm that maybe is kind of adjacent to what the CrossFit Games and the CrossFit community does. But I'm curious, like, if that's something you'd ever consider, or something you're kind of maybe eyeing as another side pot possibility for you as an athlete?
Yeah, that stuff like some of that stuff looks really cool. I mean, I had a look at what was it called? It was like right after CrossFit Games Part 2, called the Spartan Games, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And like that stuff interests me, and there's always something like that. And I think I have an idea that one day I'm going to try and say yes to all those things. Right. And I just want to like use my fitness and get out there and just use it. But like right now I'm trying to stay really focused in kind of my plan and my training progression, and trust that like I can have these really peak, like really special opportunities to display what I have in essentially May, and then hopefully qualify to the CrossFit Games, and then again in, July, August. So right now that's what it looks like. And then, I always say like, well, I'll do the games, and then maybe next off season I'll do those things. And then I probably won't. And I'd love to, but like from my experiences, like the stuff I've learned, like we've really been focusing on my back squats, for example, and just some squats, and really just putting like a lot of emphasis and energy and time into those sessions, 1 or 2 sessions a week that are I'm just squatting, and I'm FaceTiming my coach, and I'm spending extra time warming up, and I'm watching every single video, and I'm like tracking my velocity and all this stuff. And the compounding effect of that focus every single week on just those squats, I think has made a really big difference. And then I do that in every single session, and I'm like, man, like I don't, where would I fit in the training and the travel and the prep and the deload for a high rocks competition? Like it just doesn't really, I'm like, I'd have to take something out here. And I feel like I'm making really, like I'm building on it each week. I'm adding 5 pounds, or I'm adding 1 rep, or I'm, decreasing the rest in these intervals. Like I was doing these Fran intervals, and like, I was doing like each week it was like decreasing rest, or adding a round, or adding a set, or whatever that is. And I'm like, man, I feel like I'm really kind of pushing against this bubble of what I could have ever done before. And I'm like, well, if all of a sudden I wanted to train for one of those, and it's like, all right, I'd have to start doing more running. I'd have to, travel for a week. I'd have to deload. I'd have to compete. And then I'd have to have a rest week to recover from it. And then I'm like, well, there goes, all that progress I just made I wouldn't have made that. So right now, no, but hopefully I'd love to again. And I think the hard thing with that, especially right now with COVID, is I was actually messaging a friend about the same question. I'm like, oh, do you want to do that? And I was like, yeah, it's tempting, because then it's like a bird in the hand. But like, there's 2 in the bush, but the problem is the bush could have COVID. and so I'm like, the bird in the hand is going to like, like an event that's tomorrow, and I could somehow get there and do the, Spartan Games or High Rocks or something like that. But I'm like, oh, I'm waiting for, we'll call them regionals for now in like May, June. But I mean, that might not happen. So I don't know.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So along those lines, and wanting to do all this stuff, and wanting to make progress, how do you manage or avoid overtraining? And how do you know, I might be pushing the line a little bit here and I need to back off?
That is one of like the hardest questions to know. And like you have to live it. I think you have to, not that the goal is to overtrain, but you have to essentially keep trying to add stuff, because, it's like, if I train more, I'll get better. It's like, well, yeah, like, that's like kind of true, right? Like, but there's a line definitely where it's like, if I squat heavy once a month or twice a month, like twice a month will probably get your squat stronger. But if you squat heavy every single day in a week for 3 months straight, probably too much. So it's like, well, where's that line? And I think if you're kind of listening to this and, you're trying to get competitive, and, you want to train more, you want to get better, and you have the time. I mean, for a lot of people, it's like, get there as much as you can, given your schedule. If you have kids, if you have a job, if you can, for most people, it's like, if you can get to the gym 5 times a week for an hour, that's great. If you want to be competitive, I'd say it's more like 4 times a week for an hour and a half. And then a 5th time, maybe on like, I used to do Saturdays where I'd do like a double day, where I'd do like an hour in the morning, an hour and a half in the afternoon, or like, a big, like 2.5 hour kind of monster session. And you can make a lot of progress, like a lot of progress that way. And how do you know when you're training too much is basically eventually you'll know. And you need, and you'll need a good coach that's hopefully had athletes or themselves, they've been there. And then you just start seeing the warning signs, whether that's like, for me, it's often like a short temper. And I just find myself getting irritated quickly. And I'm like, oh, I'm starting to get there. Like, I'm close. Like if I was to just keep pushing, no rest day, it's like I would burn out, and or I'd stay sore too long. So there's all these kind of little warning signs. And it just takes, you have to have gone there and then come back from it. And then no matter what, because you want to be successful, you're probably going to accidentally go there again. And, you're just kind of like tiptoeing on that line, and hopefully more on the side of caution, because, no matter how much progress you might make by like pushing the envelope, you're probably going to make more if for an entire year you don't get injured.
Yeah.
Interesting. That's always kind of, but you really, not that I'm encouraging people to overtrain and get injured or like burn out or get adrenal fatigue, because I'm not, you want to avoid that, but you kind of have to get close to that to understand what that feels like. And then ideally, if you're keeping like a training journal or something, you'll start to learn like, oh, like, these were kind of these like warning signs, like emotionally, or my sleep, or, just my, like, for me, a lot of times it's just like a eagerness to train. And so usually near the end of a week, at the end of a long training block, so I'll kind of do like 4 hard weeks, then an easy week. That last like week on like Friday, Saturday, I'm just like, I do not want to train. I don't want to go in the gym, and I'll warm up and I'm like, still don't really want to be here. and then I'll get going. I'll do the first, like, strength piece. I'm like, okay, like this is fine. And then the last workout, like, I did a workout that was an 10-minute AMRAP of burpee box jumps, wall balls, and step ups. And I'm just like, I don't want to do this like at all. There's no part. And I'm warming up and I'm like, doing a few reps of each and kind of I'm like, nope, still really don't want to do this. But I'm like, hey, Brent, like just 3, 2, 1, go it, ease into it. And then halfway through, like, you're already in it, so you might as well kill yourself. Basically,
while I'm
like,
here,
you're already there. You're already doing it. You got the dumbbells in your hand. Like, don't put them down. And then you finish, and you're like, you did it, man. You overcame that frustration. But then, like, tomorrow we rest. Like, tomorrow we are like, staring at the roof, trying not to overthink. And then next week's a deload week. And so, you start to like, but because usually at the end of the training, a deload week, and the beginning of the next one, I'm like, give it to me. Like, like one more, like, maybe I'll do a little something extra. And it's like, and then it's the resistance to do too much when you're fresh, right? It's like, no, like, hold back. We got 4 weeks ahead of us here. Like, just stay the course, because you want that last day of the 4th week to be like a good session, as opposed to like using up all that energy in the first week. And then you're missing out on the last 3 weeks of progress. So
totally.
Patience.
Yeah. It takes a lot of foresight too, which I always say, you CrossFitters were good foot soldiers, right? Well, like, you put it, you aim us at a target and let us go. But like, sometimes we don't know when to dial back a little bit. But speaking of self-improvement, and I want to talk about this a little bit, it's a little, maybe a little more TMZ-ish, but I'm kind of curious. Like, I saw something going around the interwebs a little bit, not just with you, but a few athletes too. But you were the chosen athlete for a breakdown of some Olympic lifting, particularly.
Oh, yeah.
For I think it was Woo lifts is what it was. I'm just kind of curious, like, that whole situation. What is, because I saw that you'd comment and you're like, hey, kind of not cool. and then Fraser and a few other people followed suit. So I'm just kind of curious, like, the whole situation with that.
Yeah. I saw that account pop up ages ago. And I think to give credit where credit's due, I think Fraser commented before me, said something very similar to what I said. And I had messaged her like, a year or so ago about something. But, I think it's just sort of like the way in which some of her content, I suppose, is marketed, just kind of really rubbed me the wrong way. And like, shout out to her for like making a business. And like, I have an online training business, right? With like the Professor Project. But it was a bit frustrating, I guess, seeing, someone who doesn't have, like, it's this weird thing. Like I've been thinking about it more. So basically what I commented, for those that are wondering, is I think there was a lift of, I think it was Tia or another CrossFit Games athlete was doing like a heavy lifting competition. And then, this account was like breaking down the lift, like, oh, here's what she should and shouldn't do. And in that, and some of her cues were good. Some of them were wrong about the particular lift. And then, but it was more just like, I was a bit frustrated, and I was like, hey, like, just kind of putting this out there, like, please don't use my image to promote your business, So if you find a video of me at the CrossFit Games snatching or cleaning or whatever, like, I don't really give you permission to use my image. I don't know if you've, talked to Tia or whatever, but like, please don't use mine. And so people kind of caught on to that a bit. And I mean, it was a bit tongue in cheek, but it's sort of like, I mean, with the Professor Project, for example, like, I'm trying to make people better at CrossFit, and I do some critique videos, but I critique my own movement, right? Like I have videos of me, like, where I did a workout. I practiced a regional workout in 2016 in like April. And then I had side by side with what I did on the competition floor. And I compared the two and like what I would have done differently. And like things I even did wrong that now I know are wrong, like technically or rest wise, or I chalked too long or whatever it is. But like, I'm not going to kind of tear someone else's technique down to try to sell programs. You know what I mean? Unless I pay them first.
Yeah, that's true. But that's an interesting situation, right? Because I feel like it's not necessarily something that we have dealt with at a level that other sports have seen so far, as far as with CrossFit. Like the appearance and likeness of athletes in other professional sports is, I mean, there's teams of lawyers that are dedicated to that kind of stuff, and it's a very well protected and a very well established process in those instances. And we haven't really seen that much in CrossFit, or at least it's been kind of like just kind of like, I don't want to say don't ask, don't tell, but like if something like that pops up, it just doesn't hit the radar big enough, or there's not enough involved or at stake at that particular time for it to really make a splash. And I think we're starting to see that tide turn just a little bit. So I'm kind of curious where that hits for you as an athlete, that, you want to protect your image and likeness, and you want to make sure that, you are compensated accordingly anytime you are involved in something where your performances are being utilized for monetary purposes. And it's just kind of a weird gray area, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, that's like, I mean, you summed it up perfectly. And so for people watching, if they're kind of a little like, what's the problem? It's like, let me put it to you this way. If you were selling, some t-shirts and you were like, oh, like an image of Michael Jordan, like Michael Jordan jumps so high, I want to jump like Michael. It's like, no, like that's kind of Nike's territory. You know what I mean? Like that's a big no-no. Yeah. And so it's the same with my face, right? Even though it's, like obviously we differ in degree by like a lot. And I'm not claiming I'm anywhere near that level of like stardom or whatever, but it's the same kind of thing, right? And so whether you're hawking a t-shirt, like that's cool. Like if you want to sell t-shirts, you want to sell training programs, but using the image of like someone else without kind of their like, approval first. And then there's a difference, right? And what's kind of troubling is obviously and I'm no lawyer, but there's, if you're a YouTube account that's like covering the news, and you're like, you're a news account and you're bringing up like what's happening in like the sport of bodybuilding, and you're talking about these guys, and it's like, yeah. And then obviously that account, they have to make money somehow, and they're probably going to make it with ads. And so it's this interesting, like, area. Right. And I mean, because of my, like, I don't have a team of lawyers like Michael Jordan does. Is there probably a lot that I can really do about it? If someone tries to slap my face on a t-shirt, it's like, I'll probably try, but am I like, don't get any ideas if you're watching this, but, it's not like you're going to sell 1 million of them anyway. So, but yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it's, kind of starting to be a new thing. But I mean, you look at someone like, like Rich Froning. I mean, the guy, there's people, and I still run into people in Kelowna that didn't even know I lived here. I'm like, oh, aren't you on Netflix? So it's like, there's a bit of curb appeal. Yeah. And I'm sure with Rich, like all around the world, like I met a person that didn't even really know what CrossFit was, but they bought Rich Froning's book. And I was like, what? Like, why? And they're like, well, like I knew he was like at the top. This was a few years ago. They're like, I knew he was like top of his sport and like kind of undefeated. So I'm always interested in like reading books about the mindset of people like that are able to kind of like push past the norm and like be like better than everyone else. And I was like, wow, like that's, you know, and so there's something there. Like, and that guy knows who he is. He knows him by name and knows his face. And so, you know, if he was on a box of, you know, Cheetos, you might be like, oh, I might buy those Cheetos. So.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's not a CrossFitter either. So it's growing. But.
I mean, I'd buy those Cheetos. I like Cheetos in general, but still. Absolutely. Yeah.
You brought something up, the whole critique thing. We live in a world now where, you know, everybody can be a critic and everybody can post his or her thoughts on whatever. And I'm sure that you are more subject to that than, you know, your average Joe. And how do you deal with it so that it just doesn't affect you?
I think it does affect me, right? Like it definitely does. You know, and I think anyone who says otherwise is either they have definitely thicker skin than me, and like kudos to them. But like I'm just not that person, right? You know, I'm a sensitive guy or whatever. I do care what people think to a certain extent. Maybe more than others, less than others for sure. And I think, you know, I think we had a call a couple of weeks ago and we talked about this, and it's just like, when I do read that, it pings a little more, you know, that negative comment than like a positive one, right? It sits with you a little longer. And I think, Tommy, you said something, it's like what, like 10-1 or 3-1 you need to like balance that out.
Yeah. The ratio of like good comments to bad comments and how it is. I think it fluctuates between like 6 to 10 and 10-1. It's amazing.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, like, you know, so I'll read a negative comment that says something like, actually, I think it was just recently, Morning Chalk Up posted like a workout that I'd given them, and someone commented something like Brent, like, do we still care about this guy or something like that? Doesn't he suck now or something like that? It was funny. And I mean, I respond because I saw it. I'm just like, nah. I'm like, I was in a good mood. So I responded. I'm like, I guess depends on who you ask. and you know, I usually don't respond to him, but that I just felt like it because I was responding to a few other like nice comments. And it's just funny. But usually when I read something like that, it like affects me. And I'm like, you know, obviously I want everyone to think that my best days are ahead of me. But if I have to believe that more than anyone, like really all that matters is, do I believe my best days are ahead of me? And the answer to that is yes. And then do the people in my corner, are they supporting me so that the best days are ahead of me? You know, my wife, my coach, my parents, like, yeah, of course. They still love me. Are they proud of me? Yes. And then it's, you know, I read something like that. And if it does ping, just like, you know, if something personally, like if, you know, Tommy's at if you're at like a birthday party and someone like takes a little stab at you and like just says something that's just like, man, that was like really funny, but like what a dick, like, oh, I feel like shit, like how dare he like just comments on your like, oh, like nice outfit or something. You're like, what? Like, ugh. And then you're in the shower the next day and you're like, I should have said this.
That's the worst part. The comeback always hits you like when it's
oh man,
too late. You're like, why can't it be like a movie when you just zing it back? And so the way I deal with it is I just, if it really sits with me longer and it does bother me, and especially it's going to bother you more if you're in a bit of a foul mood, right? If you're I was in a good mood when I replied to that. So I was like, and I just like commented something, and obviously I still remember it, but it doesn't bother me. But if I'm in a bit of a bad mood, or if I've just had a bad training session, and then that's just going to fuel that, like, you know, it's like, oh, there's another piece of proof that like, yeah, I don't have what it takes, you know, and then I'm going to think about some other piece of proof. Like, oh, remember when I failed like a muscle up at some competition or something, and that, you know, and then it's like, yeah, there's that, and I bet people think about that, and it's like, probably people don't think about that, you know. like when was the last time someone thought about, you know, some failure I made in 2014 at some event? Like, who cares, right? No one remembers. I remember, but no one else does. And so it's like, it's what you choose to look at. And so if I'm starting to snowball, I just start, like, I might even physically write down or verbally say like, hey, like, let's talk about, to myself, all the reasons why, they're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's going to probably be more reasons. You can come up with more reasons than you could come up with negative ones. And then even if there aren't more, it's like, well, what are you going to do? You're going to quit? It's like, yeah. You could, you know, it's like really, like, even after the games, especially in 2019, like, I didn't have the, you know, the performance I wanted from a leaderboard standpoint, but also just like performance wise, made some mistakes, whatever. I'm like, well, you know, like, it was a week of kind of not being in a great mood. And I'm like, well, you know, you can keep going and be miserable. You can quit, or you can keep going and pull yourself out of this. It's like, those are like your three options, right? It's like, you can just quit and be like, yep, you know what? I do suck. I'm out. or you can be like, you know what? The pros of like keep going outweigh the cons. And then it's like, well, if you're going to keep going, you might as well do it with a good mindset. You might as well be positive about it. Otherwise, what's the freaking point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll let you go here in a second, but you just brought something up and I wanted to ask you to kind of end this thing. You said, you believe that your best days are ahead of you. So why do you believe that?
Oh, I mean, because I have to is part of it, but I'm still seeing really good progress in my training, and more often, like when I look back at the competitions I've had that have gone well, there are more that have gone well than have gone poorly. And when I really look back and I'm honest with the training that happened leading up to those events, I can remember like feeling progress, feeling momentum. And there's always doubt, especially with CrossFit, way more doubt in this sport, at least from a personal experience, maybe because I'm older, and I like overthink things more. But like when I was playing volleyball, it's just different because the rules, I guess, maybe. And you're just like, well, like I'm going to go out and play. And like, when the ball comes at me, I'm going to like try to not make a mistake. It's just, in swimming, you're like, well, I know my times and I know these other athletes' times. Whereas with CrossFit, there's just so much more doubt because you don't know what the events are. Mm-hmm. And there, you see people's Instagrams, and back then I didn't have social media, right? So you see people's Instagrams, you're like, whoa, like Jim from whatever, Oregon, he just snatched 400 pounds. Like, whoa, like I can't beat him. And so there's kind of like more noise. But when I really go back, and this is me personally, I can't say this about, everyone's experience or like confidence, so to speak. But for me, I'm like, when I really go back, when training was going well and I felt like I was making progress and I showed up to an in-person event, I did well. Like more often than not, like way more often than not, the event went very well and I enjoyed doing it. And it was worth it. More importantly, regardless of placing, it was worth all that sacrifice, all that dedication, all those times saying no to, going out for drinks or going to bed early or getting up early, or, it was worth it. And then I look at my training now and I'm like, man, I'm having better sessions. Like there's like little things in training. Some of them I'll keep private. But there's little things in training that are going really well. And I'm like, man, like this is stuff I haven't been able to do before. And, my plan, I'm really confident in the plan. And like, all along the way, these little checkpoints that I wanted to reach that are leading towards, like I said, being good at handstands, I'm making them. I think last time we talked, I had like a really good strict press session. I'm like, frick, I did like a 5x3 at a weight I've never done before. And I'm like, I strict press all the time. So I'm like, okay, like that makes a lot of sense. Like that's leading towards that strength base. And then we're going to do higher reps. And then we're going to do handstand push-ups in like workout scenarios. So boom, boom, boom. Like here's the first marker. And like we nailed it. And then, so there's just all these markers in training that make a lot of sense that are leading logically towards a good performance. And usually every competition I go into from a CrossFit standpoint, maybe I'm the only one, but I know I talked to Brandon Swan about this once, and we were talking before regionals like 2 years ago, and we were both like nervous. And he's like, yeah, it's just part of it. Cause he's been doing it since 2011. He's like, every year before regionals, you have a freak out. Right. Because like what that 2 or 3 weeks out, right before the workouts are announced, you start freaking out because you go, well, what if this, like, what if it's 20 legless rope climbs per time? What if it's a 2-rep max, of my worst lift? What if, and you start thinking of these like crazy worst case scenarios, and then you go like, yeah, it'll probably just be like CrossFit, And then sure enough, you're like, yeah, the workouts are different than what I would have thought, but they're also like, yeah, it's fitness still. Like, and then, it all kind of shuffles out, and usually, I do okay. So I just have to believe it. And even if I'm wrong, I still remember that it has to be worth it. And it is. So.
Well, Brent, we really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Best of luck with the training. And I hope that you keep hitting those personal bests and making progress. And we look forward to not only seeing you, but hopefully this whole ecosystem back on the competition floor pretty soon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks so much, guys, for taking the time and letting me ramble on. It was a good time. Hopefully you enjoyed it. So
yeah, just stay away from those spicy Instagram wads, man. They'll get you.
Yeah, that's if you take away one thing, guys, just stay away from the spice
and stay away from the bushes with COVID as well. So we need to have that. So Brent, yeah, thank you so much for doing this, and best of luck moving forward.
All right, thanks, guys.